Before I begin my launch presentation today, I'd like to ask you guys a couple of questions. Please raise your hand if you can drive, if you plan to drive, or if your parents drive. Cool, okay. Please raise your hand if you can vote, plan to vote, or if your parents vote. Okay. Okay, and finally, please raise your hand if you've received a higher education, plan on receiving a higher education, or if your parents have received a higher education. Okay, we'll get back to those questions in a minute, but today I'd like to start my launch presentation by talking about a word that has had a multitude of definitions over history and has been associated with many political and social beliefs. Today, I want to talk about my favorite F word, feminism. Okay. Now, when I say feminism, some of you may be thinking the following: liberal, man-hating, female supremacy, devaluing of being a mother. What if I told you that that's not necessarily the case? On the basic level, feminism is the advocacy of women's rights based on the equality of the sexes. So if you just raise your hand and you're a woman, or if a female family member or friend also applies to those questions, congratulations, you all qualify under the category of a feminist. But I understand how, in modern times, feminism is understood in its most extreme views. But the same can be said about any groups. So let's take political parties. In the US, political parties have a lot of polarizing issues. And those issues are usually caused because one group assumes the most extreme and stereotypical of the other. And I can assume we've all heard the harsh language associated with these stereotypes. So throughout my presentation, I urge you to hear me out. I'm not saying you all need to call yourself feminists, but I would hope you would uphold women's rights as a basic moral and value. Now, to understand the issues that our country has with women having roles in power or significant roles outside of the home, we have to understand how patriarchal societies developed and how gender norms became a thing. Patriarchal societies began during hunter and gatherer eras. And during this time, it was most efficient for women to be working in the internal workings of these communities. They'd harvest and gather vegetation and care for children, whereas men were better suited externally, hunting, protecting. As these communities began to expand, gender began to play a role in warfare. And what I mean by this is women began to be used to gain regional or political advantage. Now, between this time and modern industrial revolutions, the role of women wasn't always clear. We had steps forward as feminism was something created in the 19th century. However, these gender roles that were created during hunter and gatherer societies stopped our country from achieving full rights and representation for women. Now, these gender roles made sense for the time, and the key words there are for the time. In medieval times, kings would kidnap one another if they wanted their opponent's land. You don't see Dunham kidnapping Mr. 40 because they want Episcopal's campus. That's just something that doesn't happen. So why do we have a dress code that sexualizes collarbones? Or why do we assume that if a woman is having a negative emotion, it's because she's on her period? To illustrate this point, I thought it could be fun if I told you guys the stories of two significant historical girl bosses. And as I'm telling you these women's stories, I want you all to think internally about who in modern times I could possibly be comparing them to. First, we have Joan of Arc. And Joan of Arc is super significant because she played a really huge role in France's war against England in the 100 Years' War. At age 17, she went to the King of France with visions she had on how to improve France's military. And at this time, they were a mess. They weren't unified at all. And the king took a chance on her and allowed her to be in front of the troops. And she was amazing. She inspired the troops, got them unified religiously and politically, and got them excited to go to war for France. Now, I just want you to think internally who I could maybe be comparing her to. Although Greta Thunberg wasn't leading armies like Joan of Arc did in the Battle of Orleans, she did begin her campaign against climate change at age 15 by protesting outside of Swedish Parliament. Both women achieved a lot despite their young ages. However, there were major setbacks in that they are judged because they didn't fit the societal standards of their time. Joan was known for being too masculine, and all of her victories were discarded as witchcraft. And Greta's usually made fun of for her speeches. Next, we have Elizabeth I, and if you've ever met me, she is so cool. I mean, I could go on for hours. I won't do that because I know we have limited time. But Elizabeth, also known as the Virgin Queen, is super special because she defied all societal and social norms of her time. She was a woman as a monarch, never got married or had kids, and did a good job at ruling England. In fact, her time is known as the Golden Age of England. The economy flourished. Arts and literature were doing really well. This is actually when Shakespeare, one of Elizabeth's favorites, became famous. And she played a key role in defeating the Spanish Armada, which is at this time the beef between England and Spanish. Okay, whatever. But she received a lot of backlash because she was a woman. Being a woman came with feminine traits, which were thought of as weak. Women weren't supposed to be monarchs. That was a man's job. And despite proving her opponents wrong multiple times, she still faced a lot of setbacks. Like Pope Pius, the pope at the time, excommunicated her from the Roman Catholic Church because of her role. Now, this may seem a little outlandish, but I decided to compare Elizabeth I to Britney Spears. The 2000s Queen of Pop and the literal Queen of England actually have a lot in common. Britney Spears began her career in her late teens, early 20s, and one of her most famous songs is Hit Me Baby One More Time. Now, in this music video, one small wardrobe change altered the trajectory of her career entirely. And if you haven't seen the music video, I'll catch you up. Essentially, she's in a schoolgirl uniform. And the public and the media latched on to this innocent, virtuous, youthful persona and attached it to her career. And her career went on for many years, into her 30s and 40s, and she didn't always fit that virtuous stereotype that the media had created. And when she acted differently than that, she had a lot of repercussions. Both women had the power they had based on this virginal superiority. Being virtuous is thought of as a good thing, even in modern times. Now, while I could continue to make these comparisons all day, I think the point that I'm beginning to make is pretty clear. We've come a long way from Elizabethan England and 14th century France, but there's still a lot of similarities in how we treat women today. A lot of jokes are at the expense of women's sexualities or just straight up distasteful. A lot of slang words and terms that we use in our everyday vocabulary influence our automatic biases that we have about women, whether we realize it or not. And I know it's not out of, a malicious intent, but we need to be more thoughtful when we're talking about or to women. And if you're worried about offending someone, think about this. Would I say this to my sister? Would I say this to my grandmother, my cousin, my aunt? Would you say it to your mom? If the answer's no, then you probably shouldn't say it. Now, I've thrown a lot at you guys, so let's just take a moment to reflect. We are so blessed in that we live in a time where technology is the most advanced it's ever been. We literally hold tiny computers in our hand and can communicate with people all the way across the globe. That's pretty amazing. And while you can't influence the behaviors of others, you can influence that in yourself. And that is such an incredibly powerful thing. Your actions matter. Your words matter. So wherever you are, whether that be school, home, the mall, Trader Joe's, make sure you're conscientious of those around you and be empathetic and understanding of everyone's emotions, no matter what their gender.